Today, I'd like to talk about the difference between Hinduism, the religion of the vast majority of the Indian people, and Hindutva, which it's a word. Hindutva means the essence of Hinduism. Uh, Nothing wrong with that. It sounds okay. But the suggestion is there is a imputation, there is an allegation that Hindutva is something quite different from Hinduism. It's not the essence of Hinduism. Rather, it is a sort of a Nazi ideology. And it is very dangerous. It's like the notion that, there is German patriotism which goes back, thousands of years. Tacitus in the Germania, he has described some virtues that the Germanic, the Teutonic people had. And they regarded themselves, perhaps not all the time, but certainly for so long as the German language has had a written expression, there has been very much so. There has been a German nation, and I was born in Germany. I don't claim that I know that language or anything of that sort, but I do love Germany. Why not? My parents loved it. My elder sister, her first language was German, she loved it. And it's very interesting that the mayor of the city in which I was born, or really it was a town, a small town in Germany, as Le Carre puts it, the mayor is, or was, as far as I know, a gentleman whose father was from South India. Like my father, he was attached to the Indian embassy. But he married a local girl, and now, so you have somebody who is half Dravidian or South Indian. Of course, many people, like for example, if this gentleman's father came from Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka, it would be better to say that they are Aryan. It's because we are Tamil. We like to, we feel that the word Dravidian applies to our ancient language and our ancient culture. Though, of course, it's not a racial term. These are not racial terms at all. And it turns out that the word German, even though when I was born and later on, the German nationality laws looked as though they were based on race. But this is no longer the case. The fact is that a person of South Indian origin, on his father's side, he's German, he can be the mayor of Bonn. So Germany isn't really any different from any other country. But, and furthermore, when we look more closely, we find that there was no great pathology associated with German nationalism. There was a pathology associated with the thinking of the German general staff. Germany was the first country to have a general staff, to have, in other words, a dedicated a bunch of military leaders who believed their own nonsense, the stuff created in their own war colleges, in their own, they had their own worldview. But the fact is that there's another country at the opposite end of the world called Japan. So Japan had a general staff just as Germany had a general staff. And both Japan and Germany, the fact of the matter is that both only came onto the gold standard after receiving reparation payments. In the case of Germany, it was after they got reparation payments from France in 1871. In the case of Japan, it was after they got reparation payments from China in the 1890s. So, both in Germany and in Japan, you have a rather bizarre situation where generals and admirals and so on, they develop a military doctrine which ties the hands of the diplomats and of the politicians. But why did that happen? And the answer is it happened simply because the lesson that these guys had learned was that military victory means that you can get up to the gold standard, which means that you can have rapid economic development. So conquest is, or winning wars is how you get rich, how you help the country to come up. But we know that the German General Staff made a terrible mistake. And we also know that the French General Staff, they made a terrible mistake because they didn't have a military doctrine. So basically France, they spent a lot on defense, but they didn't have an offensive doctrine. What that means is, you see, if somebody punches you, you've got to have a response to that punch. You've got to be able to inflict some harm on the guy. And that's why, in school, when you're a small kid and you're being bullied, you're not going to be able to punch the big guy as hard as he punches you. Yeah, but you can kick him in the shins. You can inflict some damage. So, yeah, he then punches you again, and you lose that bout. Okay? But he's not going to punch you again because he knows he's going to get kicked, in his shins. There's some damage. He receives some damage. So, you have to have an offensive doctrine. And if you're small and you're, inflict the damage as fast as you can before the other guy knocks you out. And that's this is game theoretic. That this is a successful. This is something animals know about. It's virtually hardwired into our behavior, our ethology. It's that. So really, it's rather bizarre that people in India would make a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva, which is the essence of Hinduism. People like Shashi Tharoor, they're doing so. They're saying Hinduism is good, but Hindutva is bad. And what they're saying really is that Hindutva is like Nazism or the extreme nationalism in Japan under Dojo and that sort of thing. So really this is, but as we know that there's nothing wrong with extreme nationalism. In fact, it's rather a good thing because if somebody attacks you and you hit back, they stop attacking you, and you don't have to fight a very prolonged war, which is very costly. So there's really nothing wrong with nationalism. There's nothing wrong with religions standing up for themselves. And the fact is that religions which or other social movements which don't stand up for themselves, they disappear. So the question arises as to what actually, what we're talking about. Why has Dr. Tharoor, and there's some guy called Professor Arun Sharma, he's also written some nonsense. What's going on? What is the issue between Hinduism and Hindutva? Very briefly, let me say this. The Hindu religion like the Muslim or the Christian or any other religion or the communist ideology in India, was heavily and to some extent remains heavily implicated with the notion that some of hereditary entitlement. That God has has created man unequal, and of course women are even more unequal, and homosexuals and this and that, and people who didn't go to this school, who didn't go to that college, they're unequal, who don't speak with this accent rather than that. So this is the old feudal notion that God has chosen some kings and certain aristocrats, and he has put the vice-regency, he has appointed them his shadow upon earth. And in Tharoor's native Kerala, which Swami Vivekananda described as a madhouse of caste, if a working class person whose ancestors had not grabbed the land, had been less, they were smaller in number, or they had not been able to beat up the Nayars, the group to which Tharoor belongs, is a dominant caste, fantastic caste, very handsome, beautiful in the case of women, and skilled in martial arts, in mathematics, in Sanskrit, and this, in everything. No, it's wonderful, wonderful. But then you could find absolutely equal genius among any other group from Kerala. It's Kerala culture, God's own country. Nothing wrong with that. And you will find among Nayars that, of course, many of them are, yes, Nayars are Hindus, and they are superb Hindus, because maybe the investment of the in education in Kerala was in culture, and Kerala was richer, I think, than other parts of India for a long time, and wealth does generate cultural excellence, and no question about it. Nothing wrong in that. We can't look down on people because their ancestors were poor, but nor can we look up to or look down on people just because they weren't conquered. Well, knives could have been conquered by Tipu Sultan, but the British, they did intervene. But still, it's a fact that at the bottom, both in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, that for some reason they were able to maintain independence. And perhaps it has to do with, Kalari and martial arts, and, let's not speculate. Let's not speculate. All we can say is that the essence of Hinduism, though the reality, the appearance of Hinduism may have caste, the appearance of Christianity in South Africa in 1970 or even in 1980, the appearance of Christianity in South Africa was fundamentally racist. It was said that, in the Bible it says that the sons of Ham will be subordinate to the sons of some other guy, Japhet or who the fuck. But by the 80s, at least the Protestants, this had been, in fact, the Afrikaan, it's a Protestant church, it's a Dutch church, and they had been expelled. In the 80s, they were expelled from the ecumenical movement within the Protestant churches. And then they changed their mind. They said, no, actually, Christianity doesn't say that black people are inferior to white people and that they should be their slaves. It doesn't say that. But still, in South Africa, you could say at a certain time, Christianity is committed to racialism. Now, Tharoor's Hinduism, he says that he got it from his daddy, and his daddy got it from his daddy, and but that Hinduism of Tharoor, it is vile, it is casteist. It believes in dynastic and hereditary privilege. And Tharoor, though an educated man, his doctorate is from Georgetown. He worked for the UN. But he is a member of a party which slavishly goes on saying, now Rahul Gandhi, at the moment he is not the Congress president. He was, then he resigned. And now they're saying, oh, please come back. Oh, Rahul. तो आजा मेरे बालम. They are longing and thirsting for the presidency of Rahul Gandhi. वो उनके वक्त हैं. वो कैसे वक्त हैं. And these vakts, this bhakti, this devotion to Rahul Gandhi, what's it based on? Is it based on his proven leadership skills? No. Is it based on sexual attraction? Are they vying with each other to marry this gentleman who has decided not to get married? Is it sexual? I don't know. I cannot say. It may be. It may be that Dr. Tharoor hopes to. It may be. So if we rule out a sexual motive, what are we left with? The answer is we are left with Dr. Tharoor's Hinduism, which is based on hereditary entitlement. So he himself, he's a Hindu because his daddy was Hindu, and they held a high position in Hinduism. And he's certainly done well for himself. And he hopes to do even better. It is notable that though he may be on bail on charges of terrible cruelty to his wife and of abetment to suicide, but he is on bail. He's not in jail. And he's a member of parliament. And we all know that when it comes to sweat equity, he's a believer. He's a believer in sweat equity. So we can understand why he's in politics. We can also understand why he writes books saying, I'm a Hindu. Why I'm a Hindu? And the answer is because, suddenly the Congress Party realized that 80% of the population of India is Hindu. And being anti-Hindu, unless you're a communist. If you're a communist, you can be anti-Hindu. If you're a rationalist, you can be anti-Hindu. But then you have to actually do good governance. So the communists in Kerala, they're meritocratic. You look at Minister Shailaja, Health Minister. She has won plaudits around the globe. She's a communist. But who was her mummy? Who was her daddy? The answer is nobody gives a shit. She went to school, went to college. She got a job as a teaching high school science. And she was speaking in Malayalam, explaining scientific concepts to young people. And she joined the Communist Party. She worked, it's a cadet-based organization, just like the RSS, which is where Russia, it's a nationalist party, or a nationalist volunteer group, any nationalist party, or I should say group, organization, within that Narendra Modi had come up. He came from poor background, much in fact poorer than Shailaja. And he's done well on merit. That's why he's prime minister. It's merit, nothing else. And Shailaja, she has received plaudits for merit, for doing well, and because there was a Nipah epidemic in Kerala just a year or two ago, so she knew the protocols, and she, the entire administration, so to speak, had been vaccinated. It already had the antibodies. It already knew how to respond. So the response was fast. And Shailaja is somebody that the Hindu, the Muslim, everybody, they'll vote for. The Christian, they'll vote for Shailaja because even though she's an atheist, even though she is a communist, because she did her job properly. And, in politics, it doesn't matter whether, or in plumbing, it doesn't matter whether my plumber believes in God or Satan. I don't care. If he's the guy who can sort out my plumbing, do it properly, good price. Politics is like plumbing. It's nothing ideological. So, what is the essence of Hinduism, Hindutva? What is the essence of Hinduism? The answer is the essence of Hinduism is the same as the essence of Christianity, or the essence of Islam, or the essence of communism. Essence means something which is true in all possible worlds. Yep. So we can imagine a world where, there's no feudalism, where there's plenty of land, so there are no landowners. We can just go and start working on land. We can imagine that world. And we can imagine a world where, everybody has a cheap cell phone, which is even better, which is better than this cell phone, as it's bound to be in 10 years' time, just as this is way better than what I had 10 years ago. We can imagine that. So basically, knowledge is a public good, in the sense that it's non-rival, it's non-excludable, you can't charge for it, it's there, it's ubiquitous. We can imagine that world. We can imagine a world where land is a free good. Sure. And we can imagine a situation where there's no arranged marriage, no need for endogamy. A young boy likes a young girl, they like each other, and they have kids, and there's enough to, they can produce enough by their labor to support the kids. So no need for any caste, no need for any mention of race, nationality, and so on, because land is a free good. There's plenty of land to go around. There's no need to increase your Lebensraum, your living space. We can imagine that. Would Christianity still exist? Would Islam still exist? Would Hinduism still exist? Would Confucianism still exist? Would communism still exist? Yes. These ideologies and these religions, they are faith. They're a matter of faith. They would still exist. They may compete with each other violently. They may not. That's not something which is predetermined. But what we will not find in Christianity or in Islam or in Hinduism is things like untouchability, things like this crazy prejudice that Tharoor and Manishankar Iyer and the higher caste South Indians, that they are expressing. They're well educated. They studied abroad. And they feel revulsion because, somebody called Modi of Ganchi caste. He's Ganchi, are they? And they don't even know what is a Ganchi, They say, Neech aadmi hai. He's a local class man. How can he take the position of the Nehrus who went to Cambridge? They've been going to Cambridge for 3-4 generations. may not have you know, done particularly well academically, but you know, so this is the prejudice, the caste and class prejudice, the elitist prejudice. And yes, it's true that this existed in Hinduism, it existed in Islam. You know, in Iran under the Shah, there were people who were nominal Muslims. You said to them, oh yeah, I'm Muslim, yes. And what their religion really meant was that they felt they were aristocrats, landowners, rich, and that the mullahs, like this Khomeini, I remember one gentleman who had the name Sipadar or something, you know, he explained it to me that means that my ancestor was the general, leader of the Sipahi, something like that. And he thought that as a Hindu, I would like to hear that Khomeini was actually Al-Hindi, and for this reason was basically a brown or little bit dark-skinned, untouchable. He thought I'd like to hear that. Why? Mad. Because my skin is extremely brown. I don't want to hear that Khomeini is bad just because his ancestor lived in India, because that makes India look bad. And you know, you're basically saying India is a shithole. And this guy was so arrogant, and he's talking like this to me. Should I punch him? Well, you can't, because, you know, Iranians, Persians, they're very, you know, it's very polite and very... But it's stupidity. And it's that sort of stupidity of which those who say Hinduism is good, Hindutva is bad. It's that stupidity that they endorse and that they propagate. And I'll come back to this in the next session of this podcast.